Hello everyone, so I've been playing these rules here, Blood and Steel from Firelock Games, and I must say, quite enjoying it. I'm not without some criticisms, but go into that in a moment. So I thought I would put up a Batrep, which would enable me to give you a game, but also to discuss the rules in a little bit more detail as we go through the game. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll know that one of my main reservations with not only this set of rules but other skirmish in quotation marks rules is that they don't conform with my idea of what skirmishes were like in this period, in the 19th century, in the Victorian era. So that's not a problem at all. All I do is use the rules to play small size battles and skirmishes that do match my impression of what historical reality was like. So rather than putting on little miniature armies onto the table and playing with those and pretending that they accurately reflect a skirmish, I'm going to play games where the forces on each side are far more uniform and homogeneous, and the obvious kind of area where that would apply would be in the sort of colonial type skirmishes of the time, rather than in the big continental kind of battles or wars of such as the Franco-Prussian War or the Crimean War, all of Bismarck's wars, in fact, the American Civil War, those kind of things. I don't really feel that these rules or others along the same lines accurately portray what skirmishes in those kind of conflicts were like. But things like the wars on the plains of America, or colonial conflicts, on the northwest frontier of India, or things like that, I think they're going to be fine for. So I have put together some armies to play in darkest Africa, and again we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Before I get going though, some very kind of general comments on these rules. The first would be that I don't feel that they are very well proofread. The worst thing of all, the biggest problem I've got with them, and that you have to kind of adjust to, is that they must have written the text and then somehow incorporated it into a book when they published it, and all the pages got shifted one page on, shall we say. So wherever you come across a reference to a page, so here used to indicate the number of Bite the Bullet rerolls available, page 10, you will find, I can guarantee you, if we go to page 10, that is page 10, but the Bite the Bullet rules are on page 11. And it's got a lovely index, really lovely index, but as you can expect, every single entry in this index is off by one page. It does get a little bit irritating after a while. So that's an example. You know, I've spotted a few other kind of you know, textual kind of type errors. Not too many. That's the worst one of those. But there are a few errata that you wouldn't find until you start playing the rules, and you can get already on the Firelock Games. They have printed out a smallish number of errata, which is very useful because you wouldn't pick those up until you actually played a game that involved these particular rules or units or whatever. So that's not something that a proofreader could pick up. It's errors in the text that can only be picked up by gameplay and so on. Another general observation is, while we're on this errata sheet, that the Firelock Games website has got some downloads for Blood and Steel. They've got the errata and they've got a quick reference sheet, which is very welcome. I always like that, being able to sort of laminate a quick reference sheet and have it handy when you're playing a war game. The one thing that I would say they still need to do is that this game is really token heavy. You need tokens to put down on units to show when they've been activated, to show if they need to reload their weapons, to indicate if they've run to ground, as it's described in here, which means that they're harder to hit. And you need tokens for to give to one player or the other to determine or to indicate who's got the initiative edge in the game. You need fatigue points, so you need tokens for fatigue. So there's an awful lot. And in the back of the book somewhere, if I can find it quickly, I'll show it to you. Yeah, here we go. Here are some of the markers that you might need. You know, it would be nice if they had some of these and more for different, you know, for different situations that you could print out from the website. While I'm on this page, though, take a look at that. This is another kind of type error. This marker here should say taking cover, but it says taking over. Little things like that, always bad indicators of you know, the care that's been taken in the production of the book. So I don't want to sound too down on this because I have, as I say, have really been enjoying these games, so I'll try not to linger on the negatives of it. Next thing I would say, though, is that the book contains force options for the following armies, it reads. So you've got 6 different conflicts that took place during the period when Queen Victoria was on the throne. The Second Seminole War, the Second Taranaki War in New Zealand, the Mexican-American War, the Anglo-Zulu War, the American Civil War, the Spanish-American War. As I've already said, I'm going to be using that mainly for colonial conflicts, so none of those covered by those force lists, but there are going to be plenty of other people who've got armies for, you know, European conflicts or something like that, or other areas, other kind of largish feeling armies, you know, rather than skirmish armies that they've only got a small force and they want to have a game with them, you know, which is fair enough. But you're then obliged to make up your own force list. Now, that then becomes a little bit problematic. In the back of the book here, you can see there are force lists for all those 6 conflicts, and they're quite detailed, they're quite thorough. You know, perfect if you do want to play any of these particular conflicts. But what if you don't? Well, first problem you'll find is that you might have units that don't resemble any of the units in any of these particular conflicts. So you have to have a way of kind of costing them. And there is no, although you've got a points cost for each of the units that they talk about in the book here, there's no indication I can find. I might be wrong, but I have gone through this fairly thoroughly now, this book, and haven't been able to find it. There's no indication of how the points are actually costed. Why it costs a different number of points to have, say here in the whatever conflict this is, to have the US infantry figure being 5 points per figure, but the militia 3 points each. Obviously the militia in some way is going to be lower quality, but why 2 points? How do you cost your army out? And it's very difficult to try and work that out. The rules are basically similar kind of philosophy to a lot of wargaming rules, that you have the core rules and then you have all these special traits and so on that you add to the unit to give it its own kind of unique characteristics. And again, no kind of indication of how much value you attribute to each trait. Some of the traits are actually negative traits. They're not all good traits. Some of the traits actually detract from the unit's abilities, but it's really hard to know how many points you should reduce from the cost of that unit to hamper them with a negative trait. So I found that very, very difficult, and I have I have built up 2 armies, but I'm not entirely sure whether they are properly balanced and so on, and I have accurately costed them. Yeah, I think that is more or less all the kind of criticisms I would have at the beginning before so now what I'll do is I'll show you the forces that I've produced for this game, and we can carry on I can carry on my explanation of how I found these rules from that. So let's show you the armies that I'm going to be playing with. Right then, so you'll get a closer look at these figures later on, don't worry. I just want to give you a sort of general overview of how I've composed the forces. So I'm going to be playing a scenario set in sort of Kenya, land of the Masai, and it's going to be fought between the Masai and a kind of an exploratory column led by the famous explorers Burton and Speke. So the Masai, fairly easy to do. I've basically just used core units of warriors. I haven't got any support units. The way you build a force up is you can have any number of core units you want, but you can only have one of each type of support unit, and you have to have more core units than you do support units. And then you have a leader figure as well, and you have various upgrades that you can either upgrade your leader or your units. Okay, so I've basically got, what's this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 core units of warriors. So this is what I was saying about, this is the way I like to portray skirmishes. It's to have a completely kind of homogeneous, selection of figures. I don't want them to be too disparate and mixed up and have different specialities and that kind of thing. So this is ideal, and I've based it off of the army lists for the Zulus. So these have got mainly the attributes of the married Zulu warriors. So the Masai had a number of kind of characteristics. One of them was that they didn't really favour the use of the bow. The bow to them was something that was used for hunting rather than fighting, and it was also a weapon for old men and boys. The actual warriors would fight with throwing spears and thrown weapons and melee weapons. So it's very simple. So they don't have a shoot characteristic, a shoot factor, but they do have factors for melee, shoot saves, which is when they're shot at, melee saves, which is when they're hit in melees, a resolve, which is kind of like a morale factor, and they have an initiative value as well. Sorry, I'm showing you the leader there. This is the warriors down here. So that's all fairly straightforward. So I've given them 3 characteristics, traits rather, and at this point maybe I should say that all the traits that it's possible to give to units are listed on one page in the rulebook. But this is another kind of criticism I would have of these rules, is that the traits don't necessarily these traits are not necessarily applicable to your standard units. Some of them seem to be traits that only a leader could be given, and some of them I suspect only to artillery units. But there's no indication of that on this page here. When you first look at this, you think, oh yeah, I could give this to my my core units and make them a little bit more distinctive that way. But then when you actually come to read what the rules involve, or the exceptions to the rules that they give, it doesn't really work. So I've given them 3, which I think they can work, which is ruthless, which gives them a bonus in melee in the Masai's case, because they don't have a shooting ability. I've given them scouts, which allows them to ignore movement penalties for difficult terrain, and I've given them the large unit ability, which means they can go up to 10 models in a unit rather than the maximum of 8 for a standard unit. And then there's a leader. Now this is another aspect of the Masai's way of, their whole culture, is that they didn't have kings or tribal leaders. They had tribal elders, who usually kind of, worked in a sort of committee, almost a committee style. They didn't have one single leader. So in a battle, I've decided that their leader would probably be a sort of a particularly auspicious famed warrior. So I've just called their leader Famed Warrior. And again, he has some of his own characteristics. So I've given him inspiring and tactician. So I'll talk more about those in the game. And then as far as upgrades go, most of the army lists in the rulebook have a musician that you give to the leader, and it extends his command role, so drum beats or bugle sounds or whatever. So I've got this figure of a hornblower, so he's perfect to be a musician. And the whole total for that, as I say, it's really hard to work out how the points are costed, but I reckon that's about 271 points. So that then means I'm playing a game which is slightly on the large side for Blood and Steel. So normal playing area would be 3 foot square, but anything over 200 points they recommend 3 foot by 6. So again, I'll go on a little bit about the table later on. So that's the Masai. So now let's have a quick look at the explorers. Right then, so this is my column for the explorers. So before I carry on, maybe I should also have mentioned that as well as the traits that you give to individual units, each force has national traits. So obviously, if you're inventing your own force for one of the for a conflict that's not one of the 6 in the book, then either you're just going to have to ignore national traits, or you're going to have to invent your own. So I didn't add any national traits for the Masai. While I'm learning the rules, it's an additional kind of burden of things that you have to keep in your brain anyway, so it's probably better to keep it simple anyway. But with the Victorian explorers, I have kind of tweaked the rules a little bit, which you probably could excuse as being the national traits, for this exploratory column. So what this represents is the 2 explorers, Burton and Speke, who are travelling across Kenya, accompanied by a force that has been recruited by the Zanzibaris, who are in control of the territory, and whose permission they need to cross the land, and who are supplying them with troops, and as well as the bearers and all that kind of thing, which aren't portrayed in this column. So the leader in this case is Richard Burton. So he is a single figure on his own. That's another strange thing about these rules, that I do feel that the leader units are tiny. I mean, the biggest they seem to be is 2 figures if you give them an upgrade of some kind, like the Masai had the hornblower. But it does feel in the game that they're incredibly vulnerable and easily removed from the tabletop. So what I've done is, I'll skip straight to my upgrades first of all. I've given this column 2 upgrades rather than 1, but the upgrades are sort of akin to the NCOs in the rule book. So Speke is actually a sort of second in command, but he's attached to a unit, as is this Zanzibari leader. He's attached to a unit of Zanzibaris, and they have their own kind of attributes, which I've sort of adapted from the book, sort of invented them myself. So as I say, tweaking the rules in that way, you might be able to say that's the national characteristic of this particular force. I don't know. So what we got is the leader on his own. Got 2 units of what I described as native levy. So they are armed with muzzle-loading muskets. Then I've got 2 units of Askari, one of which Speke is attached to. So the one Speke is attached to, that makes up a unit of 8, which is the maximum size you can have for a normal unit. And then I've got a unit of Zanzibaris, including the Zanzibari leader. Everything on this table is in this force is armed with muzzle-loading muskets, which I kind of feel is about right for the period. You're talking about the sort of 1850s and early 1860s, so it feels about right. There is a rule that you're not allowed to mix weapons in a particular unit. As far as I can see, there's nothing really. It doesn't break the rules if you do that. So I've got, because you have to have the figures as portrayed, Speke has got a sort of double-barreled shotgun, so I'm keeping him as armed with a double-barreled shotgun. And in the games I've played, it doesn't seem to cause a massive problem. You just have to roll a separate dice for him so that you know what dice he is rolling, and it seems to work fine. So that hasn't been a problem. Yeah, but one of the big problems as I was saying earlier, some of the traits in the on that page only seem to apply to certain types of unit, and there is a trait called slow reload and there's a trait called quick reload. Now, slow reload I've given to these two units here, but I strongly suspect that it's really only an attribute that you should apply to artillery. But it basically means that once the unit has fired, it receives two reload markers rather than one. So it's going to take two actions to reload the musket. That seems right to me, because they're sort of barely trained in the use of muskets, and it seems sort of appropriate to me that it takes them a long time to reload their muskets. But the reason why I think it only applies to artillery is that I've given the Zanzibaris the quick reload trait. Now, in the book, the quick reload trait, let's read it to you. Here we are, quick reload. This unit receives one reload marker after shooting. Now, normally you would get one reload marker after shooting. So it's only artillery that gets two reload markers after shooting. So I think quick reload and slow reload should only apply to in the rules are intended only to apply to artillery. So I've given them a quick reload attribute, but I've changed it so that they don't receive a reload marker at all after shooting, which makes their muskets equivalent to the kind of advanced breech loading weapons of later periods and later conflicts. But I don't see that as being a massive problem. You could present these Zanzibaris as being a very expert group of musketmen who can reload very quickly, a bit like the sort of British rifles in the Napoleonic Wars or something like that, maybe. So I think that's all right to play it that way. And as I say, some of the weapons in later periods do have that attribute anyway, that they don't receive a reload marker. So it's not going to break the rules if I do that. So I think I've had enough preamble now, so let's take you to the table set up and show you the table. Okay, so this is a view of the tabletop from a distance to give you an impression of the whole table. Apologies if the lighting isn't very good. The weather conditions are a bit dismal today, I'm afraid, although it is brightening up. And also apologies if you hear some background noise from my 3D printer, which I've got running at the moment. So as I say, I've got over 200 points per side, so I'm playing, it recommends a table size of 6 foot by 3, and I wanted to play on this teddy bear fur mat that I kind of coloured and painted in to look like African savannah. That isn't quite the right size, it's 5 foot by 4. So what I'm going to do is play on a 5 foot by 3 rather than a 6 foot by 3 table. So it's going to be 3 feet from here to about here, just beyond the terrain there. And I've got two types of terrain on the table. There are these sort of areas of hilly ground, so they are going to be they're not going to be elevations as such, they're not going to be hills, but they are going to be sort of rocky terrain, so that will give hard cover. And the other type of terrain I've got is these termite mounds, which I thought were appropriate as well for the savannah. So they are going to be soft cover if you're in them, and all the terrain is kind of high-ish terrain, so it will block line of sight. So I'm not going to faff around with saying that a particular termite mound blocks line of sight. The whole of the template is going to block line of sight. And then what you're supposed to do is put 3 objective markers along the midline of the table, equidistant from one another. And as I say, it's a very kind of token heavy game, so I'm using some creatures to represent the objective markers. So in the centre of the table I've got some cattle being herded by a young boy. Over here I've got a group of hyena who are stalking the cattle, and over here there's an elephant just roaming about, minding his own business. Okay, now the object of the game is to inflict attrition points on the opponent, and at a certain stage in the game the opponent will have to start testing for resolve to determine if he leaves the table or carries on with the game. Each side has an attrition value to begin with, which is simply the number of figures in the force divided by 4 rounded up. So the Masai come out with an attrition value of 16, and if I remember correctly, I'll have to look it up again, but I think the Victorian explorers have an attrition value of 9. So every time either the Masai lose 16 figures or the explorers lose 9, they gain 1 attrition point. But you also inflict attrition points on the opponent by securing objectives in the game, and those objectives are determined by the mission that you roll for. So there are 6 mission types. In theory, again, as I say, it's quite a high token level. You're meant to put chits into a bag, and each side draws out a chit with, and the number will determine the mission. There is only 1 mission 4, so only one side can have the defend mission, but there are 2 of every other one. So what I'm going to do, rather than bother with that, is to roll a dice to decide on each side's mission for the game. Right, here we go then. So I'm going to start by rolling for the explorers, and they've rolled a 6, which means their mission is a raid. You must destroy important material. Objectives: the 3 objective markers are important to your mission and may or may not also be important to your opponent. Your opponent gains 1 attrition point for each of up to 2 objectives your units destroy. To destroy an objective, a unit must be in contact with it and take a successful start fire action. Explosives may be used. You must inform your opponent about attrition points as soon as they are gained. Deployment: units enter the table on turn 1 using an advance or run to ground action as the first action of their activation from any point along your baseline. And restrictions are no hidden setup. So depending on what the Masai roll, I might change out some of those animals, which I think it'll be a little bit unrealistic to try and blow them up with explosives. I might change that for some buildings, but we'll see. Let's see what the Masai roll. So they've rolled a 5, which is Vanguard. Your force must push opposing units back ahead of the larger force. Objectives. The 3 objective markers are not important to your mission, but may or may not be important to your opponent. Your opponent gains 1 attrition point if your main leader reaches the halfway point of the board, or 2 attrition points if your main leader gets within 4 inches of your opponent's baseline. You must inform your opponent about attrition points as soon as they're gained. Units enter the table on turn 1 using an advance or run to ground action as the first action of their activation from any point along your baseline. Restrictions: no hidden setup. Right, so now I've got the missions. I'm just going to change the objective markers so they look a little bit more solid and destructible. Right, here we are then. So the aesthetics don't work quite right, but I didn't want the animals left on the table. I think something more solid is more appropriate. So I put some Masai huts on the table. So they're not going to be considered to be there for gameplay purposes. So they're not buildings. They don't provide any sort of cover. You can see through them, but they're just there as sort of indicators of where the objectives are. And again, they look a little bit odd, sort of, not in a kind of little community setting. They're set apart at quite a distance, but they're going to have to do. So now we can get on with the game. Okay, right, so each unit generates an initiative dice. So from now on we're going to be using D10s. So sometimes in the rules you can get a leader who will generate 2 initiative dice, but that's not the case in this game. So the Masai are generating 7 initiative dice, and the explorers are generating 6. So that means at the beginning of the game that the Masai have more dice than the explorers, so they gain what is known as the initiative edge. So they will lose that edge as soon as a fatigue point is inflicted on them, and that's not an attrition point, it's just a fatigue point, which I'll come on to later when we're playing the game. So that would then go to the explorers, but then equally as soon as the explorers have a fatigue point put on them, it goes back to the Masai. And also, I told you this was a token heavy game. I'm using red chits to represent what is known as bite the bullet markers. 2 of them seem to have got stuck together here. Excuse me, right, there we go. So each side begins the game with 3 bite the bullet tokens, and they can spend that at any time to re-roll all the dice that they have just rolled. So to have a chance of altering a kind of really bad dice roll, and each side gets 3 of those in a game. Now, this is where I've had to kind of alter the rules a little bit, because what each side would do is roll their dice, and that is now their initiative pool, and it is visible to the opponent. Okay, so that's not a problem so far, but the problem comes if you're playing solo. I'm just putting them in order here as well. So we've got 10, 5, 5, 4, 3 and 2 for the explorers, and the Masai have 9, 2 9s, 2 8s, 3, a 2 and a 1. Now from the second turn onwards, not now, the number of 1s with relation to the number of 10s will matter for calamities and fortune, but you don't roll that in the first. You don't roll for that in the first turn, so we can ignore that for the moment. But the problem comes when you're playing solo now, is that each side is meant to secretly bid one of these dice, and then the successful bid goes first. If it's a draw, so if say both sides had bid the dice with a 2 on it, then the player with the initiative edge would go first. But clearly I can't do any secret bidding against myself, and it never seems to me, I suppose there are times when you would want to bid low against a high value, so that you force your opponent to go first. I can see the point of that, but I can't really reproduce that in a solo game. So the way I've been playing it is simply to line the dice up in order of descending value and play from the highest down to the lowest and do it that way. So the person, you know, with the better dice roll will get to roll first in each activation, and that kind of is a sensible way to go. So what I'm doing then is playing these 2 dice first of all. Now the Masai character, the leader, also has an ability called Tactician, which allows him to change one of the values of the initiative dice up or down once the calamity and fortune rolls have been negotiated. So right to begin with then, I'm going to change this Masai's 9 up to a 10 so that they are both equal, and then because the Masai have the initiative edge, it means he can move first of all. And 4s or above a successful dice roll, which means you can make 2 activations for a unit, and 3 or below is a failure, which means you can only make 1 activation. Okay, there we are then. So first Masai movement's taken place, and unit there has moved into that difficult terrain. It looks as though they've moved quite a long way onto the table, but they haven't. It's because the foot of the mat on that side isn't being used. So they didn't have to worry about the difficult terrain. They've got the scout's ability, so they made 2 4-inch movements, which got them there. Normally difficult terrain would reduce your movement down to 3 inches. And on the other side of the table, there's a unit of Zanzibaris there, have moved onto the table there, so they've just moved 8 inches in. So now we go to the next dice. Okay, if I haven't said so already, then just bear in mind that I am still learning these rules, and I do have a bit of a sort of poor ability to store rules in my head, so I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to make omissions, but so far I don't think I have made any. So I brought another 2 units on the table. Another unit of Masai has come on here, and again I forgot to say before that you have to put a marker down to show that that unit has been activated, because you can only activate once per turn in general, and I'm using tokens from Dead Man's Hand footprints, which seemed appropriate. And over the alternative side of the table, where are they? There they are. I brought a unit of native levy on as well. So I just realised it looked a bit odd, and I realised that I had put the objective markers a little bit too close to the Masai side of the table than I should have done, so I just repositioned them slightly so that the Victorian explorers have a chance of reaching them. And another 2 units have come on the table. So there's another unit of Masai over there, and the unit led by John Manning Speke there, Ascaris, has come on the table as well. The Masai tactic is going to be fairly crude. They don't have any shooting weapons, so their only chance of inflicting damage on the opponent, inflicting attrition points, is to actually engage them in melee. So they're simply going to have to get to grips with the explorers as quickly as possible, move across the table as fast as they can, rapidly as they can. Okay, so I've moved another 2 units on the table. There's some Ascari here, and they moved on sort of level with this extra group of Masai who have just moved on. So now all the dice left were failed rolls, so that means I can only activate for 1 action per unit rather than 2. Much the same then, there's a group of Masai there moved on, and very close to the table edge over here, only moved on 4 inches, group of native levy there. So now the Victorian explorers have got 1 dice left to play, and the Masai have got 2. So this is where it now becomes a little bit tactical, because I've left the leader figure, Richard Burton, till last to activate. So he is only going to be able to move on the table 4 inches. So what I'm going to do is put him 4 inches onto the table there, up on the right hand side of his table edge. Now he has a command range, this is why it's now getting a little bit tactical. He has a command range of 8 inches, which means both of those 2 native levy units are in range of his commands, but the 2 other upgrades he's got, the Zanzibari leader and John Manning Speke, who are attached to different units, automatically bring their units they're attached to into the command range of Richard Burton. So I've now, out of the 5 units on the table, I've got 4 of them in command. And the reason that's important is that the leaders are assigned a certain number of command points. In Richard Burton's case, it's only 1, but it means that he can now activate or give a command to a single command to any unit, regardless of whether they're activated or not. So he is going to get the Zanzibaris, who are quick reloaders of their muskets, remember, to fire the first shots of the game onto an approaching Masai unit. Okay, so the Zanzibaris here are going to shoot at that unit of Masai there, and its range is measured from the closest figures, so it's 13 inches. So that means for every 5 inches you add a penalty to the to hit score. So 0 to 5 inches is 0, 5 to 10 is +1, 10 to 15, which is what this is, will be +2. So they normally would need 7s to hit. That means they now need 9s to hit. But they're not aiming, they're shooting at a large unit, so it comes down to 8. So you roll 6 dice, 1 per figure, needing 8s to hit. And they have got 1 hit. Now I could spend a bite the bullet and replay that, but I don't think it's going to be worth doing at that stage. So at the moment they've got one hit on the Masai, but they have a shoot save ability, so if they roll 6 or above, then they don't suffer a casualty, and they only roll a 5, so they lose a casualty. Now you have to test for resolve, so they have a resolve value of 6, so you roll 2 dice in this case, one because they were hit, and another one because they took 1 casualty, so you roll an additional dice for each casualty. So I need to roll 2 dice, scoring 6 or higher. For each failure, that unit gets a fatigue point. So 1 failure, 1 success, so they've lost 1 casualty and got 1 fatigue point. Right, there we are. So they remove 1 figure, put 1 fatigue point on them. So I'm using the skull tokens as fatigue points. And on the question of tokens, on the matter of tokens, if it had been any other unit than the Zanzibaris, I would have had to put reload token or tokens on the unit. But they, remember, have got that quick load ability, so they can remove the reload token straight away. So I'm not going to bother put a token on them. And another thing I nearly forgot to do, because the Masai have had a fatigue point inflicted on them, they lose the initiative edge to the explorers now. So I've moved that green shit across to the explorers. Okay, and finally I've moved on this unit of Masai and the Masai commander, and now he has 2 command points rather than 1, so he's quite gifted in that respect. So you're not allowed to give more than 1 command point to any one unit. So he is going to give a command point to both this unit and this unit here to advance forward another 4 inches. The fatigue, by the way, a single fatigue on a unit has no effect, so it's not going to influence anything at the moment. So those two units have now moved forward. I'm moving them around the building. As I say, the building is only there for the purposes of being an objective. It shouldn't affect movement or anything, but it's simpler to move them around rather than to take the building off the table. So now we're on to turn 2. So roll the Masai dice first. So they have got a 10, a 9, 2 8s, a 4, a 2 and a 1. So they have an equal number of 1s and 10s, so no rolls on the calamity and fortune table for them. And then the explorers have got 6 dice to roll. So they have got a 10, a 9, 2 9s, a 7, a 3 and a 2. So they have more 10s than 1s, so they can now roll on the fortune table. So the obvious thing to do is to move that unit back to its previous position, so I'm going to move that back 4 inches. Doesn't count as an activation, so it hasn't been activated this turn yet. Right, there it is, move back. Now, before I forget, now I'm going to use the Masai leader's tactician ability to alter one of the dice in his dice pool. Okay, so after the 4, which is a success, there's a 2. Had it been a 3, I could have moved that up to 4 and got 2 actions out of it rather than 1. But as it is, there's nothing, I can't see any advantage really to increasing any of these, so I'm just going to increase this one from 2 to 3 anyway, so that it outranks the Explorers 2, and that saves, because at the moment the Explorers have got the initiative edge, so their 2 would have gazumped the Masai's 2, so I don't think there's any great advantage in that, but that's what I'm going to do. So now we can spend these 2 dice here, and because the Explorers have got the edge and they're both 10s, the Explorers are going to activate first of all. Okay, so I'm going to activate the Zanzibari unit first of all to shoot again at that unit they've already inflicted 1 casualty on. Now, you can only fire once in a turn, even though they could, they don't get a reload marker, but you can only fire once in a turn with muskets. So what they're going to do is take 1 action to aim and a 2nd action to shoot. So they get 6 dice. Originally they would need 7s, because it's 13 inches that goes up 2 to 9, but it comes down once because it's still a big target, so it comes down to 8, and it comes down another 1 to 7 because they are aiming. So they have 6 dice needing 7s to hit. It's a pretty good roll. 6 and the 2 miss, but they've got 2 10s, a 9 and a 7, so 4 hits. So the Masai need to save 4 hits, and their shoot save was 6. So they get a 9, a 9, a 7 and a 1, so they take 1 more casualty, and again they now have to test for resolve, so they roll 2 dice, 1 for being hit and 1 for taking a casualty, and they need 6s or else they take fatigue points. 10 and a 5, so they're going to take 1 more fatigue point, so I'll show you what that means now. Okay, the implications of that are, first of all, they lose a figure as a casualty, and that means they are now down to 8 figures, so they are no longer a large unit, so they are harder now to hit. But they already had 1 fatigue point, they now have 2, and that means that they lose 1 action, so they can only be activated with a dice of 4 or higher. So the Zanzibari's fire is beginning to have an effect on them. Right, now the Masai get a chance to play a dice, so they're going to activate this unit here twice, and they are within 8 inches of these Ascari. So what they're going to do is move once 4 inches to get to about there, and then declare a charge on the Ascaris. So with a charge you move in and get an automatic melee activation, but I'm going to leave them where they are at the moment, because when you declare a charge, which they would do at this point, if the unit being charged has loaded weapons, they are entitled to defensive fire. It's an activation outside of their turn, so they automatically get a fatigue point for doing that, but if they can shake the enemy, then the enemy will fall back 4 inches, so in other words it will end up back at that point. So I'm going to do all the dice rolling before I move any of the figures, in case I have to reposition them. Right, here we go then. So the Ascaris have a shoot factor of 7 as well, and the target would actually be within 4 inches of them, so there's no penalty for range, but they get a bonus for shooting at a a large unit, so rather than hitting on 7s, they're hitting on 6s. So there's 6 dice hitting on 6s. 2 misses, so 4 hits. So the Masai save on 6s. So they've only saved 1, which would mean 3 casualties. So I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to spend one of their bite the bullet tokens. I'm going to re-roll that. So saving on 6s. I'm not allowed to re-roll it again, and again they've only saved 1. So 3 casualties. So they take a resolve test now. Resolve of 6, so 1 for being hit and 3 dices for the 3 casualties. Save, fail. So they only take 1 fatigue point. That's significant. That means they take 3 casualties, 1 fatigue point, but they do close to melee. Here we are then. So the first melee of the game. Now, I put a reload marker on the Ascari before I forget, but more significantly, in terms of this melee, the Masai now have a fatigue point. So they have the ruthless ability, which means that if their opponent has more fatigue points than them, it reduces their to hit in melee roll. So as that's not the case, they can't use their ruthless ability. But what they do have is thrown weapons, so it means that they require 6s to hit in melee, but any fails can be re-rolled in a charge, not in subsequent rounds of the melee, but in this charge, because they're throwing their clubs and axes and so on as they move into melee. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dice hitting on 6s and re-rolling any fails. Okay, so far I've got 2 6s there, a 10 and a 6. So 4 hits so far, and they can re-roll these 3 fails. And they get another hit, so they've got 5 hits altogether. So the Ascaris don't have any abilities to help them, so they've got simple melee save of 6. So 5 dice saving on 6s. 2 fails, that means they take 2 casualties, so they have to take 3 resolve tests, and their resolve is uh, 5. Pretty good resolve. So 1 fail, so they take, how many was it? 3? I've forgotten already. No, 2. 2 casualties and 1 fatigue. So that's how that's ended up. That melee will just continue now. You only get a break in contact if a unit is shaken, in which case it's obliged to fall back. But that requires 3 fatigue points, so both sides have only got 1 at the moment. And also note that the Ascaris haven't yet been activated, so they could initiate a further round of melee now, which it's obviously in their interest to do, in order to try and inflict 2 fatigue points on the Masai, so it pushes them back, but that will come later in the game. Because you can only initiate 1 round of melee per activation as well, That does mean it's not worth spending a 2 activation dice on them. Okay, so group of Ascaris led by John Manning Speke has moved a little bit closer to that objective there. They're now moving through difficult ground, so they only managed to move, activated twice, but only managed to move 6 inches. So they've got a couple of inches to go before they get to the objective and attempt to burn it to the ground. And this group of Masai have moved up close to the Ascaris, but not within contact. Ideally, I want to try and eliminate the Zanzibaris as quickly as possible, because they don't have to reload their muskets, so their fire is a lot more lethal. But in order for that unit to attack the Zanzibaris, they would have to roll a resolve test in future turns in order to bypass the Ascaris, who are a closer, target. So that is something to be borne in mind, really. This unit of native levy have moved twice, so they've moved 8 inches further onto the table. Right, so it's the Masai's turn to activate a unit. They've got a successful die roll, so they can activate a unit twice. So this is going to get a little bit complicated now, but I think I've got the rules correct. First thing I'm going to do is activate the leader's unit to move twice. So that means he moves to there, and he's now on the centre line, which means that the explorers immediately acquire 1 attrition point. So that's the first thing. Now, he has got 2 command points that he can spend, and I don't think he is allowed to command, although he's within command range, because the hornblower doubles his command range to 16 inches. I don't think he's allowed to command that unit to melee again, because you can only melee once per, how is it worded? A unit. This action can only be performed once per activation, including any free. Oh no, he is allowed to. Yeah, he is allowed to. It says the action can only be performed once per activation, including any free melee action taken as part of a charge action. So, because it's now no longer part of that unit's activation, he can order them to activate. But before he does that, he's going to spend a command point on that unit there to try and rally off either one or both of those fatigue markers. Okay, so you roll a d10 for each fatigue marker, so I'm rolling 2 d10s, and the Masai have a resolve of 6, but they can use the leader's resolve factor, which is 5, because they're within command range. And also the leader has the inspiring quality, which reads units in command may re-roll failed rally tests during this leader's activation. So I can re-roll any fails as well. And so I need 2 dice needing 5s. So 1 and a 7, so I get rid of 1, and then I can re-roll the other, and it's only a 2, so they remain with 1 fatigue point. And as far as this melee goes, the Masai can't use their ruthless ability because they still don't have more. They still have this equal number of fatigue points to the Ascari, and they can't re-roll their fails now because they're no longer charging. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dice hitting on 6s, and it's pretty good. I can only see one fail there, 3. I think you can see that on the camera. That one's failed, but there's a 10, 8, 6, 9, 7 and 8, so that's pretty good. So 6 hits, and the Ascaris have got quality that might help them. Oh no, it's not going to help them. So they've got a melee save of 6, so 6 dice needing 6s. 1, 2, 3. Well, that's going to wipe them out pretty effectively, I should imagine, because once you've got double the number of fatigue points, they're likely to get 1 fatigue point. If they take 3 figures off, they're left with 1 model, so they would have an additional fatigue point, so they would have double the fatigue points, which means they'd be removed from the table. So at this point, is it worth re-rolling that? Yeah, let's spend a bite the bullet token from them and re-roll it. So 6s to save. That's just as bad. They've got 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's the same result. 3 losses, and they can't re-roll. So 4 dice, 3 for the models removed and 1 for being hit, and their resolve is 5. So 5s to avoid getting fatigue points. No, they failed there, so they get 1 fatigue point. Let's just show you. So they're going to lose 3 models, get an additional fatigue point, which is 2, so the unit is immediately removed from the table. And this unit would be allowed a consolidation move of 1 inch, but I don't think it's necessary. So there we go. That's pretty ferocious fighting there. Okay, now Masai's got a turn now, so I've got the higher initiative dice now. 2 turns, and although this unit rallied a fatigue point off, it did so using a command point from the leader. So technically they still haven't activated, so I can now move that unit twice because it's only got 1 fatigue point. So it's going to move 8 inches that way. There we go. So they're in a slightly better position to attack those Zanzibaris, which is the unit I really want to remove from the table as far as the Masai's objectives go. Right, so now it's over. The explorers can activate a unit twice. Okay, so I'm going to activate the leader twice, so he moves 8 inches to there. He's now within line of sight of these native levy who have already moved, but he's allowed to give them a command point to have an additional move. So they are going to move 4 inches so that they are now adjacent to that objective. It takes 2 actions to start a fire, but you have to be adjacent to the building first of all for that to happen. Okay, now the Masai have a initiative dice that takes priority, and it's a successful one, so they can move twice. So they are going to immediately react with this unit here, which is just outside of 4 inches of this native levy, to move once, to get within 4 inches, and then to charge the levy. But like the previous occasion, I'm going to leave them where they are for the moment, because the levy have loaded weapons, so they have a chance to fire defensively to begin with, which would mean that if they shake these Masai, they will go back to where they began. So I'm going to do the dice rolling again before I move any figures. Okay, so there are 6 figures in the native levy unit. Remember I said that the building doesn't block line of sight, it's just an objective marker, representative of an objective marker on the table, so they have clear line of sight to the target. So they would need 7s, but it's a big unit, which take it down to needing 6s. And they get 3 hits. So the Masai save on 6. So they take 2 casualties, and they have a resolve of 6. So we roll 3 dice, 2 for the casualties, 1 for being hit. And they fail all 3, which would mean that they would be shaken. So I'm going to bite the bullet again with another token, re-roll that again. They pass 1, so they take 2 fatigues, 2 casualties, but they're not shaken. Right, there we are then. So 2 reload markers, because they're slow reloaders on the native levy, but the Masai are now in contact with 8 figures. They've got more fatigue than their opponents, so they can't use their ruthless ability, but they are using thrown weapons in a charge, so they can re-roll any fails. So it's 8 dice needing 6s, re-rolling any fails. 6. Oh, that was a success. Success. Success and success. And you seem to have 7 dice there. Yeah, let's roll another. So there's 3 failures there. First roll on that one is a failure. So I've got 4 failures, which I can re-roll. Oh, all of them succeed. So that's another. It's going to be another storming result for the Masai there, massacring the explorers. Okay, so 8 saves are needed by the native levy, and they have a melee save of 7. Not good. They've got 2 saves. Well, I think, I don't know. I think it's doubtful that they would re-roll out much better than that. So I'm just going to take the unit off the table, because that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 casualties, and there's only 6 figures in the unit. Okay, well, it's now the explorers' turn to move, and they only have 1 unit left to activate now. So these native levy are going to move once. Oh, hang on. Yeah, they can only move. They've only got 1 action. So that's all they can do. I was going to say they're going to move once and then fire and try and put an additional fatigue marker on these guys, but they're they would count as if they fired there, there'd be an additional distance penalty, I'm sure, and they're partially blocked by this terrain. So they're just going to move up to here, and that will be the end of the explorers activations. Okay, so the 2 remaining dice for the 2 remaining Masai units only allowed 1 activation per unit, so that unit there and the one in the distance there both move forward another 4 inches. So that's the end of the activation phase. Now there's a morale phase, which still doesn't kick in. The British, or the explorers rather, have now lost 12 figures, and their attrition value is 9, so they get 1 attrition point for that, and they also get 1 attrition point for the Masai leader reaching the centre line. So they've got 2 attrition points at the moment, and you don't start testing for the forces resolve until they've got 3 attrition points. But at this point, I should point out another kind of quirk of the rules that I'm not entirely clear about, and that is that you're meant to keep the missions secret so that your opponent doesn't know what your objectives are. But the minute you reach an objective, you have to inform your opponent that they have an attrition point. So it immediately becomes clear what their mission is. So in a way, I don't see the point of concealing the mission objectives from the opponent. You know, it's something you can only maintain for a small amount of the game. That's just how I feel about it. You know, other people might think differently. Okay, so now we're on to turn 3. Turn 4 then. Sorry, turn 3, and the explorers are now down to 4 units, so they're going to roll 4 initiative dice, but the Masai still have 7. And I have been forgetting to keep shifting the initiative edge backwards and forwards, but I'm pretty sure the last fatigue was applied to the explorers, so the Masai currently have the initiative edge. So this is the Masai's roll, and this is the explorer's roll. So the Masai have got 10, 8, another 8, 7 and 3 2s, and the explorers have 7, 5, 3 and 2. So the Masai have a 10 and no 1, so they have more 10s than 1s, so they can roll on the fortune table. So we'll just move these dice up here into this tray and then roll a d10 for the Masai, and they've rolled a 6, which is confusing. Choose an enemy unit and take a single move action if not shaken, or place a reload marker on it even if it usually does not take reloads. So I think I immediately know what I'm going to do with that. So this is what I mean about thinking that the leader units seem incredibly vulnerable to me, because currently Richard Burton is 8 inches away. Yeah, 8 inches away from this Masai unit. So even at the moment, he would have to activate very early on in the next turn in order to avoid being charged by this large unit of Masai, and he's on his own. But if I understand this fortune rule correctly now, I can now move him 4 inches closer, so he is now 4 inches away from that unit. So he's got virtually no chance of escaping them. And currently the explorers are on 2 attrition points. Once you get onto 3 attrition points, and then in the morale phase at the end of the turn, you start to roll for resolve. But if the leader is dead, you just lose the game immediately. So, you know, that's a game changer there. Just being able to eliminate Richard Burton. I mean, you never know. He has got some advantages, like a repeater pistol and he's got various attributes that allow him to re-roll rolls and so on, so he might even be able to hold off, how many is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 Masai warriors on his own. You never know, but chances are he's going to get killed. Okay, so at this point I could use the Masai leader's tactician ability to alter one of these dice, but it's got absolute advantage anyway. Every single dice outnumbers the opponent's dice, so I'm not going to need to change anything here. And the 10 outvalues the 7. Remember, this is my sort of way of playing it solo, so this isn't quite how the game would operate if you had an opponent. But the 10 outweighs the 7, so I'm now going to be able to activate that Masai unit I was showing you a moment ago and charge at Richard Burton. Okay, so the Masais are going to charge the explorer. He gets defensive fire, but that will give him a fatigue point because he's firing out of turn. But this might work because he only needs to inflict 1 fatigue point on this unit for them to be shaken and for them to fall back to this position here. So let's see, because it's three fatigue points and you're shaken. So let's see how that roll goes. Okay, so he needs 6 to hit and he only gets a 4, so he's going to re-roll that by spending a bite the bullet marker, and he gets a 7, so he has hit. Yeah, actually he only needed 5s to hit, but I think he rolled lower than that, so I think he rolled a 4 because it's a big unit that he's targeting at. Okay, so the Masais have got shoot save of 6 and they save it, so they don't take a casualty, but they have taken a hit, so they need to take a resolve test to see if they take a fatigue. And they fail it, so they have taken a fatigue, which means they're shaken and the charge doesn't happen. Okay, well, the explorer had a very lucky escape there, but it's now the explorer's turn, so I'm going to move that explorer. He's going to have to cross twice. He gets 2 moves because it's a high dice, so it takes an inch off to go onto the terrain and then 4 inches to get to there. I don't think you're allowed to come within an inch of any other unit for unit cohesion purposes, but he can get there. So he's now moved and he can now spend a command point, that his single command point that he's got, to order this unit of native levy here to fire out of turn at this Masai unit here, and they are let's say 8 inches away. So 6 figures, normally needing 7s, but they're firing at a big unit, so that brings it down to needing 6s. And I've used up all of my bite the bullet tokens now, so they can't re-roll that, and they've done appallingly. They've got 1 hit. So the Masai have got a shoot save of 6, which they fail, so they take 1 casualty. So they've also got resolve of 6, so they take 2 rolls, 1 for the casualty, 1 for taking a hit. Fail 1, pass 1, so they've got single casualty but also a fatigue marker. Okay, so that unit there has now fired, because it fired out of turn, so it's got 2 reload markers on it, and it's now the Masai's turn to move. So this unit here is going to move twice, once to move up, once to charge in, and these guys don't have any defensive fire now because they haven't got loaded weapons. 9 figures now in contact, hitting on 6s and re-rolling any fails because they're using thrown weapons. but they have got a fatigue which the native levy don't, which means they can't use their ruthless ability, which would have meant they were hitting on 5s. So 9 dice hitting on 6s. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 successes so far, but they can re-roll these 4. And all but 1 has hit. So that is 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 hits, and the native levy have a shoot save of 6. So they save, that's a hit. They miss that one, miss that one, miss that one. So they got 3 casualties, which means they have to roll 4 resolves, and they are resolve of 5. So they don't get 1, so they get 1 fatigue and 3 casualties. Right, Explorer's turn now, got the next dice, and they get 2 activations, so these Zanzibaris are going to aim and then fire at that group of Masai there. So 6 dice needing 7s. There are only 8 figures in the Masai unit now, so they don't constitute a large target, so it's needing 7s. And, oh, terrible, 1 hit. So saving on a 6. No, failure, so that's 1 figure off of the Masai. And they have to take 2 rolls to save themselves getting fatigue points. Pass 1, fail the other, so they now have 2 fatigue points, which means they lose 1 action. Okay, next highest dice is a Masai one, so this unit here is going to charge at the group of Askaris led by John Manning Speke, and the Masai have Scout's ability, so the terrain doesn't hamper them, but the Askari have got loaded weapons, so they can take some defensive fire first of all. So this is the point now where I was saying I've got sort of mixed weapon in here, which I'm not sure whether that's against the rules or not, but I'm going to have to roll a separate dice for the shotgun to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 7 Askaris. Well, I don't need to roll a separate dice because the only difference with the shotgun is it doesn't take a reload marker. So as long as I'm aware that the shotgun is there and can always fire. So it's 8 dice hitting on 7s. Nine there. That's 1 and an 8, and everything else has missed, so 2 hits. So the Masai save on 6s. They save 1, so they've got 1 casualty, so they need to take 2 resolve tests on 6. Fail 1, so they get 1 casualty and 1 fatigue point. Right, so now there is a melee taking place in amongst the termite hills, and this brings me to another question on the rules that I haven't been able to find an answer to, so I think it's missing from the rules, but I might be wrong, is that if you have an upgraded figure in a unit, such as an NCO, or in this case John Manning Speke, and the unit takes casualties, how do you determine whether the upgrade is one of the casualties or not? Or do you just choose it to be the last casualty removed? There doesn't seem to be a description of what you do in that circumstance, so I'm just going to play it that he's the last person to be removed from the fighting. There is a marksman ability in shooting, which I'm not implying in this particular game, where you can select your targets within a unit, but nothing to do with sort of casualties during a general scrum like this. Anyway, I've got 9 Masai figures hitting on 6, and they have 1 fatigue more than the opponents, so they can't use ruthless. So it's hitting on 6, but they can re-roll any fails. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4 successes. I think that was, I knocked that one over. Don't think that was a 10 originally. So we're going to say 5 fails, re-rolling 1, 2 more successes. So they've got 6. Yep, 6 hits, and the Ascari, I've got a melee save of 6. So 6 dice needing to save on 6. Oh, look at that, they've saved them all but 1. So they take 1 casualty. It's a pretty good game. So they need to take 2 resolve tests, saving on 5, but they fail both, so they've got 2 fatigues and 1 casualty. Right, an omission or a mistake I very nearly made there was that the Ascaris also have a fatigue for having used defensive fire, so they fired out of turn. So they've actually now got 3 fatigue markers, which makes them shaken, which means they have to pull back, and that gives the Masai the choice of whether to follow up or not, which they're definitely going to do. So this whole melee is going to just move 4 inches that way. Okay, now it's the turn of the explorers to activate, and they only have 2 units left to activate, and they're both in fairly similar situations. There's the Ascaris in a melee there, they are shaken, and the native levy in a melee there, and they're okay at the moment, just got 1 fatigue point. Now normally if you're shaken, the only thing you're allowed to do in an activation is to rally, but that's not the case if you're in a melee. So I'm going to activate these guys to melee. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dice to roll, hitting on 6s. So we've got 1, 2, 3 hits. So the Masai have a melee save of 6. So they save 2, so they get 1 casualty. So 2 resolve tests on 6, and they pass 1, fail the other, so they get 1 casualty, 1 fatigue point. Okay, now the Masai now have a dice to activate, giving them 2 activations. So I want to have another attack at these Zanzibaris. This unit here has got 2 fatigue points on it, which means it loses an activation, so it can't reach the Zanzibaris. But this unit here is just within 8 inches, the closest models together. So they're going to have a go at attacking that unit, and because they've got the scout ability, the terrain doesn't impair them, so they can reach them in 2 activations. So again, I'm not going to move anything because the Zanzibaris have a chance for defensive fire to begin with. So it's 6 dice hitting on 7s, and they will get fatigue after this for firing out of turn. One, two hits. So Masai save on 6. Oh, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, they're not a large unit, so it was hitting on 7s. Saving on 6s, so both saved. So that Masai unit can move into contact. Because they were hit, I should have rolled one resolve dice. And they pass, they get a 6, so they're okay. So they are now in contact. There they are. So 1, 2, 3, 7 dice, hitting on 6s, re-rolling failed hits because they're using thrown weapons. So there's a couple of failures, quite a lot of failures. 5 failures, 2 hits. And another 2 hits, so they've got 4 hits. So the Zanzibaris have a melee save of 7. So they fail to save any of them. So that's 4 casualties going to come off. So let's roll 5 resolve tests. They've got a resolve of 5. One, 2, 3 saved. So 2 fatigues and 4 casualties. Okay, so now it's over to the explorers to activate, and they've only got 1 unit left to activate. If you're in close combat, you have to melee. So I'm going to activate those 3 figures there to melee. Okay, so they need 6s to hit, but they have an ability, an attribute called Close Combat Specialist, which allows them to re-roll failed melee hits, failed melee rolls. But they don't need it. They rolled 3 successes straight off the bat, which means that the Masai save on 6s, and they get 1, so they've got 2 casualties, so that means 3 resolve tests, and they pass 1 of them, so 2 casualties and 2 fatigue points. That gives them 3 fatigue points, which means they're shaken, which means they have to fall back 4 inches. And it makes sense, I think, for the native levy to follow up and maintain contact, because it's the Masai charge where they can re-roll failed hits. So you don't want to leave a gap allowing them to charge across it again. So I'm going to follow up with the native levy there. So that's the end of all the explorers activations, but the Masai still have 3 units to activate. Okay, now 3 more units to activate, this being one of them, but all 3 dice are a single action. Having 2 fatigues reduces you down by 1 action, so kind of theoretically they don't have any actions to do, but you're allowed to rally even if you have too many fatigue points to allow you. So this unit is going to activate to rally, so they roll 2 D10s and have to pass their resolve test and look for 1 dice for each fatigue marker. So they need to get more than 6, and they don't, fail both, so they remain with 2 fatigue markers. Next up, this unit here, which is lagging a little bit behind, is just going to move another 4 inches forward. Okay, there they are, and then finally just got the leader to activate, so I can do something interesting with him now. Okay, so he can move 4 inches. This is just a marker, so he can move through it, over it. Doesn't block line of sight, anything like that. I'll put him about here. And he has got, because he's got the hornblower with him, he's got command range of 16 inches, and he's got 2 command points. So the first command point is he's going to give he is allowed to give a melee command to these guys. So these chaps are going to melee again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 figures with a melee factor of 6. So 7 dice needing 6s to hit. Not brilliant, only 2 hits. So the Zanzibaris, I think, save on 7s. So they don't save either, so they're off the table because there's only 2 casualties, 2 figures left. 2 casualties, so they're removed from the table. So things looking pretty bleak for the explorers now, quite rightly so, as they were raiding the Masai buildings, so they deserve to be wiped out by this ferocious Masai charge, but I've still got a command point to spend, so I'm going to try and resolve those 2, rally and try and get those 2 fatigue points off. So it's one dice per fatigue marker needing 6s, and I get an 8 and a 2, so I can remove 1 of the fatigue markers. And that is the end of turn 3. So now we've got to look at the morale phase. Well, both Burton and Speke are still standing. There's Burton there on his own, and Speke is here in the midst of this melee. But the explorers have now lost, I just counted it, I think it was 22 figures. So they've got an attrition value of 9. That means they've got 2 attrition points from their casualties, and another one for the Masai leader having reached the midpoint of the table. So they are now on 3 attrition points, which means that I must test for their resolve, which I do on the resolve of Richard Burton, who's got a resolve of 5, and if we fail this, then the game is over. 7, it passes, so they carry on fighting. Okay, turn 4 then. Something I failed to notice a moment ago, but Masai are doing so well that there's no point in trying it, but the leader has an inspirational ability, so he could have re-rolled that failed fatigue point that was trying to rally off, but never mind, we'll leave it on. So Masai still have 7 units, and the explorers are now down to 2. So the explorers have got a 10 and a 3. That means they've got more 10s than 1s, so their fortune does work for them. And the Masai have got a 9, 2 8s, a 7, a 6, a 4 and a 2. So no 1s or 10s for them. So we'll put that there and that there, and then roll on the fortune table for the explorers. So they rolled a 2, which is load and charge. Choose a unit, it may remove 1 reload marker and charge an enemy unit if able. Do I want to do that? Well, 1 unit is the leader, and the other, he doesn't want to charge into death or glory charge, and the other one is the unit that's already in the melee, so I'm going to ignore that. So now the Masai's tactician ability comes in, so I'm going to turn that from a 9 to a 10, so that it is equal, because I think, I haven't been doing it, but I think the initiative edge is still with the Masai. I haven't been keeping tabs on that, but I'm pretty sure it will be. So yeah, it will be, because of that Zanzibari loss. So the Masai are now going to go first with 2 activations of a unit. Correction, the explorers have 3 units on the table, so I'm going to roll another dice for them, and they roll another 3. But it's still, nothing else changes in what I just said, so the Masai are now going to move a unit twice. Okay, first thing I'm going to do then is try and unshake this unit here, which has 3 fatigue points on it. So first action is going to be a rally action. So I roll 3 d10s needing 6s. Each success removes a fatigue point. 3 successes, so they all come off. And then with the second activation then, they're going to move 4 inches closer to the opponent's leader. Okay, so that's then moved. Just thinking now it's the explorer's turn to do something. So I'm going to leave him there. He's safe for the time being because these figures have all now activated. So they can't threaten him for the moment. They can't reach him for the time being. So I'm going to activate, let's see. Might as well do this unit here, who are the close combat specialists. So they are going to activate to melee against, can you see that on camera? Yeah, against these Masai here. So it's 3 dice, needing 6s, and they're close combat specialists, so they can re-roll any fails. So they got 1 fail, 2 hits so far, and the re-roll fails as well. So 2 hits plus 2 hits, so the Masai needs 6s to save, and they save both, but they did get a hit, so they need to test for resolve on a 6 as well to see if they get a fatigue point, and they get 6, so they're fine from all that. So next up, the Masai get an opportunity to activate. So this is an important area here now, because if I activate these Masai to melee, then they might inflict some damage on this unit before it has a chance to activate it itself, and they're not charging, so they won't get their thrown weapon advantage, but they have 2 fatigue points and the Ascaris have 3, which means they can use their ruthless ability. So rather than hitting on 6s, they're hitting on 5s. So they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 figures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah, hitting on 5s. Brilliant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 failures. So they've got 3 hits. So the Ascari, should have this in my mind by now, in my brain, but I keep forgetting. Ascari have a melee save of 6. So they save 1, so they take 2 casualties, which means they have to take 3 resolve tests. What is their resolve factor? Resolve is 5. And they fail 2 of them, so the 2 casualties and 2 fatigue points, which means that they are further shaken and have to pull back. Okay, there they are, pulled back. So I'm now going to activate that unit. They've got 5 fatigue points on them, but they are allowed to activate for melee, I believe. Just going to check the rules again, sorry. Yeah, I was doubting myself there, but I'm pretty sure that's right, because it says a shaken unit can only perform a rally unless it is engaged in a melee, which implies that it can activate to melee even when shaken. So I'm going to activate them to melee, and if they push They only need to inflict one fatigue marker on these Masai to push them back, and if they do that, then they're not going to follow up, so they will have separated again. It might give them a bit of a breather. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 5 figures now, hitting on 6s. Three hits. So the Masai saved on 6s, and they saved them all. But they did take one. They did take a hit, even though they didn't take casualties. So they need to pass a resolve test on a 6, which they fail. So they do get another fatigue, which means they fall back 4 inches. Right, there we are then. So the explorers aren't going to follow up, so those 2 units are now separated. So the explorers are putting up pretty fierce resistance, even though things do look pretty helpless. So next is a Masai unit can activate, and they get it's a 2 activation dice. So I'll just make my decisions about that. So I think it has to be this unit here. They're wasting one of the activations on the dice just by meleeing, but you know, this is the kind of critical area that I want to get the sort of blows in as quickly as possible. So, or do I? There's no great imperative because these have activated already. Yeah, no, I think I'm going to move up one of the units further up the table, get them a little bit closer with 2 moves. So there we are. I'll just move this unit here a little bit closer. And now, next thing to do is to activate the explorer leader, Richard Burton, and he's only got a single activation. So he is going to. Where are we on the camera? There he is. So he is going to move a little bit further away from these guys who are threatening him, and then spend a command point to command these 3 guys here to have another round of melee. So it's 3 figures needing 6s to hit, and they're close combat specialists, so they can reroll fails. And they've got 1 success and 2 fails, so they reroll the 2 fails and get 3 successes. So the Masai have a melee save of 6. So they've lost 2 casualties, and that means 3 resolve tests on a 6, 1 fatigue point and 2 casualties. Right, there we are. Now they have now got 6 fatigue points, but they've got 5 figures, so they'd be removed if they went up to 10 fatigue points. So they've fallen back, and the native levy, have pursued them because their ammunition, they need to reload their muskets, and they're slow reloaders, and they're far more effective in hand-to-hand fighting. So rather than give the Masai a breather, they're pushing on with the melee. I think that's more effective. And that unit hasn't yet activated. So yeah, I might as well activate it now. Most of the dice I've got left for the Masai are 2 activations anyway. So they are going to activate to melee. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 figures now, hitting on 6s. Ooh, not bad. 3 hits. So the native levy melee save of 7. Oh, and they save all 3, but they did take a hit, so they got a resolve of 5. Otherwise they get a fatigue point, and they get 10, so they came out of that fine as well. So all the remaining activation dice now belong to in the initiative pool, belong to the Masai. 2 of them are double activations and 1 of them is single activation. So I'm going to move these 2 units twice that way to get them 8 inches closer to the action to begin with. Okay, there we are, and just to remind you again that the Masai have a scout's ability, so terrain doesn't slow them down. And then finally the leader that you can just see at the back here, he's going to move, he's got 1 activation, so he's going to move 4 inches that way, but he is within 16 inches of this unit here, which is toppling over. So he is going to give them a command. Oh, actually he's got 2, isn't he? He's got 2 command points. Yeah, so that one definitely is going to give a command to rally. So they have a resolve of... Oh, they can use his resolve as he's in command range, and they can also re-roll failed rally tests because he's an inspiring leader. So it's 3 dice needing 5s. So that's 1 fatigue off, and then they can re-roll these 2 and a second fatigue off, so they lose 2 of their 3 fatigues. And then the other command he's going to give to this unit here, who are just by the skin of their teeth within 4 inches, and he's going to order them to charge this unit of Ascaris, who are in bad shape, and they've got a reload marker there, so they can't have defensive fire. Okay, so it's 7 dice. Would normally be hitting on 6s, but the Ascaris have 5 fatigue points on them, so that means the Masai can use their ruthless ability, so they're now hitting on 5s, and because they're charging in with thrown weapons, they can re-roll any failures. Okay, so they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hits already. 2 re-rolls. 1 more, so that's 6 hits. And the Ascari have a melee save. Apologies for keep forgetting this. They have a melee save of 6. So 6 dice needing to save on 6s. No, 1 save, 2 saves, so 4 dead. And that means, let's show you again. If I take 4 casualties off, they're down to 1 figure. So even without rolling for the resolve and so on, they've got massively more fatigue points than the single figure left. So that unit is annihilated, comes off the table. Okay, it's now the morale phase, and so far the Masai haven't received any attrition points at all. They got 15 casualties and their attrition value is 16, so they've still to reach their first attrition point, whereas I've lost track now with the explorers, but they are well over 3. So the explorers need to roll on Richard Burton's resolve, which is 5, and if they fail the game is over. And they succeed, so they carry on fighting. So it's Richard Burton on his own there, and 3 native levy, which are the worst quality troops I thought that were in the column, putting up this last stand, surrounded by hordes of ferocious Masai warriors. Okay, turn 5, so the Masai still have 7 units on the table, so they roll 7 dice. Explorers only have 2 units, so they roll 2. And the Masai have got 2 10s, a 9, a 5, a 3 and 2 2s. Whereas the Explorers have got a 6 and a 3, so the Masai definitely have more 10s than 1s there, so they can roll on the fortune table. And they rolled a 7, which is may take a rally test on a unit of your choice. Right, I'm just going to have a think about that. Right, so I'm going to pick that unit there, which has got 1, 2, 3, 6 fatigue points on it at the moment, so definitely need to get some of those off. So it's 6 dice, resolve of 6, so 6 dice needing 6s. Not brilliant, just 2 fatigue points removed, but at least it's 2 off. Okay, so the Masai get to activate first, so obvious thing to do is to try and finish Richard Burton off here. So these guys are going to charge at him. So he does get defensive fire because he's got a repeating pistol. So he's got a shoot factor of 6. No, he misses. So the Masai move into contact with him. Well, there we are. It looks like it's going to be curtains for Richard Burton now. He's got Masai warriors swarming over him. So if he is killed, I think I'll say that's the end of the game, because without a leader on the table, the army would automatically fail its resolve test at the end of this turn. So once he's dead, I'm going to say that's the game over. But he has got True Grit ability attribute, which means he can re-roll any failed melee saves. So let's see how the dice go. It's 8 Masai against him. Okay, so it's 8 dice needing 6s, because they've both got 1 fatigue point each, so they can't use Ruthless. But they do re-roll their failed hits because they've got thrown weapons. So 8 dice needing 6 with re-rolls. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 hits so far. 1, 2, 3 more. So 7 hits. So Sir Richard Burton has got a melee save factor of only 7, I'm afraid. So 7 dice needing 7s, but True Grit allows him to re-roll any failures. So he's got one success here, so he needs 6 7s or above to survive. No, he doesn't get it. There were 2 kills on him there, so that's it, he is killed. Right, that's it. So Sir Richard Burton falls beneath the spears of the Masai, and we're going to call it the end of the game there. So that would be a major victory. Counts as a major victory for the Masai. I find these rules problematic in places, but they do produce a really exciting game. And this, I've enjoyed this game. I've enjoyed all the games I've played of it so far. Hope you have as well. Hope I got all the rules correct in my head. I think probably I haven't got the points worked out quite correctly, because the Masai did seem to win pretty definitively there. But it does make me think, that, as I said earlier, that they are a good set of rules for colonial games. This was almost like a similar kind of feel to it to sort of Custer's Last Battle. Sort of overwhelmed by, putting himself into a precarious situation that where he was then overwhelmed by native forces. That's exactly how this felt. Maybe if the explorers column had been a little bit more had qualities that were a little bit more disciplined, so that they were like regular British Army, for instance, or something like that, where they could form into formations and were drilled, they might have had a better chance of fighting off the natives. But as it was, they were just swamped. So yeah, that's it. That's the game. That's how it plays. And as I say, I hope I got everything correct. Apologies if I didn't. I'm certainly going to carry on playing these rules for colonial wars. I enjoyed this as much, possibly more than I did the game of The Men Who Would Be Kings that I played. So I might be switching to this set of rules for other colonial games as well. Although this whole business of the parameters of the period does baffle me in a little way. I mean, why ended it in 1901? It does, in theory. It means that I can't play my Foreign Legion. The Beaugest story was certainly set in the kind of Edwardian era rather than the Victorian one. So technically it doesn't qualify for this set of rules, but I don't see why I couldn't use it. I think it's they sort of missed a trick really by confining themselves to 1837 to 1901. But anyway, yeah, I'll stop waffling. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching, and see you on the next video.